Hi everyone, thanks for checking in today. It's Adam Coburn here at Low & Co Realty, and we're looking at the Wellington real estate market, analysing the data from the most recent month, April 2025, comparing it to the last couple of years, observing the trends and so on. So in summary folks, Wellington values are down again. I'm afraid to say that obviously is not great news for owners or sellers. That is good news for buyers. Overall key message for, sorry, just back to values, we're about as low as we've seen since the recent peaks or peaks of a few years ago. We have seen some recovery off that at times, and we're back down again. So this is about as low as it's gotten since the peak of late 2021. Overall message to sellers, there's still a lot of supply out there. We're seeing some slight reductions, as is typically the case for this time of the year, so that's a seasonal reductions as we're heading into winter, but relatively speaking, still a ton of choice out there for buyers, which makes it tricky for sellers to compete for buyers' attention. So it's still quite a tough market out there for sellers. The reverse, of course, is true for buyers. If you're out there looking in the market at the moment, especially if you're new and you're, I guess you don't have the experience of having been in the market over the last few years or 10 years even, the amount of supply that's on the market now is, relatively speaking, enormous. This is as much supply roughly as we've seen for about 10 years. So if you're a buyer, you've got an ocean of choice out there. As a buyer, it never feels like you've got enough, but I can promise you it's about as good as it's been for about 10 years. So get in amongst it while the conditions are this good for you. So let's get into the details. We'll start with the median sale price, 775,000 in April versus 820 April 2 years ago. That's a drop of 5%. If you look at the overall trend, look at the red line there, you'll see that it's broadly been going sideways since almost 4 years ago now. So since about July 2022, we've been going broadly sideways, a bit up, a bit down, and so on. Small degrees of variability, but overall going sideways for almost the last 4 years now. So that's a long time. If you follow these videos, you'll know I don't really pay too much attention to median sale price, at least not from a month-to-month basis, because it's impacted by the mix of properties sold as well as by their underlying values. The best way to look at underlying values is the Real Estate Institute House Price Index. So let's look at that now, starting with what I'm calling the league tables here. Oops, sorry about that. And Wellington has for some time been leading these league tables in the absolute worst possible way, in that we have fallen further since the peak of late 2021 than any other part of the country. And that remains the case now, and in fact, the degree to which we've dropped since the peak of late 2021, we are now just over 25% down in terms of nominal values compared to that recent peak, and that is about as far as we have fallen. So that's about as low as we've ever gotten since late 2021. So yeah, as I said earlier, not the best news for sellers, great news for buyers. So Wellington has still fallen further since the peak than any other region of the country. What about over the last 12 months? That is still the case. So Wellington's fallen by just over 4% over the last 12 months. If you look at the rest of the country, overall the country has dropped by only 0.3%. And Auckland, for example, has not dropped at all over the last 12 months. The rest of the country, you see there, a few regions have dropped, none as far as Wellington at 4.2%, and indeed many regions are recovering. Over the last 3 months, there's a bit more variability. Wellington has dropped by 1%. There are a couple of regions that have dropped by more than 1%. Overall, the general picture is across the country, New Zealand is experiencing very gradual increasing values. That is not yet the case in Wellington, or at least that hasn't been the case in Wellington more recently. We'll see soon that there have been some periods of recovery, but not over the last 3 months or so, unfortunately. So looking now more focusing on Wellington region. So yes, values fell further in April by a drop of 0.8% in the month of April, 1% down on the last 3 months, 4.2% down over the last year, and interestingly, only on average in the last 5 years, an increase of just 1.5%. You look at the graph there, you can see that towards sort of late-ish 2024, we were staging a bit of a recovery. And then and a particularly strong February, but then overall in the last 2 or 3 months we've seen values eroding again, so more recently values falling. So on balance over the last 12 months we have seen prices come down, or values come down by just over 4%. We did have some recovery in late 2024, but overall the last 12 months it has been a loss. And you can see there, looking at the different territorial authorities across the Wellington region, we're all down basically. Wellington City is kind of leading the charge there, and that again has been a bit of a theme since COVID. The cities are relatively speaking out of favour, the same is the case in Auckland City as it happens, but so Wellington City dropped 5.5% over the last 12 months. Over the last 3 months, a little bit more variability, still generally down though. Wellington City in particular, if you look there, 5.5% down over the last year, 1.1% down over the last 3 months, 1% down over the last month. Look at that over the last 5 years. So 5 years ago, we were broadly speaking in lockdown from COVID, and so Wellington City has seen on average 0.3%, let's call it zero, no price appreciation at all in Wellington City over the last 5 years. So that's pretty stark, and of course in the meantime inflation has pushed the prices of everything else up, wages have gone up, and so real prices in Wellington City over the last 5 years have come down. Looking now at new listings, how much supply is coming to the market. So 630 versus 779 a year ago and 461 2 years ago. So for the first time in a little while, we're seeing significantly fewer listings coming to the market than 12 months ago. So this is a positive sign, perhaps, of is this a new trend? Is this what we're going to see for a period of time? If so, that would be good for sellers. One swallow doesn't make a summer, as they say, but at least some positive news there for sellers. So 19% down compared to a year ago. Still a lot more supply coming to the market than we saw 2 years ago, 37% up on that basis. And again, if you look at that trend, the red line there, you can see it's gone up and then down and then up and down in the last sort of 2 to 3 years. And the last couple of months there, a bit of a heading downwards. So, and if we compare the April numbers, the new listings in April, compared to what is typical for the month of April, at least over the last 10 years or so, it's absolutely bang on average. So interesting that we've seen an absolutely typical amount of supply coming to the market in Wellington in the month of April. Looking now at number of sales, so 632 versus 609 a year ago, 471 2 years ago. So a small increase compared to a year ago, a significant increase over 2 years ago. But again, I think observe that red line. The trend is what's most interesting or most useful here. And over the last couple of years, or 2 to 3 years, you see a very gradual trend upwards. So we really did hit very low levels of sales volumes kind of late 2022, early 2023. Since then, we've seen broadly a gradual but consistent recovery. And in particular, again, if we look at what's normal over the last 10 years for the month of April, at 632, we're almost exactly average, which was 635. So interesting to note that we've seen an absolutely average level of sales taking place, and also the average number of new listings coming to the market. So if we look at those two metrics alone, you could conclude that what's happened in the last month has been absolutely normal in terms of supply coming on and sales getting made. And there, comparing it to last year, you see there that when it comes to number of sales, again, you observe there that mostly over the last couple of years, the blue bar chart is above the x-axis, which indicates that we've seen more sales taking place than we saw the same month a year earlier. That remains the case, although that trend is dissipating, if you like. So consistently we have seen more sales taking place than 12 months ago, which indicates sales increasing overall. So this is the positive news for those of you who are sellers out there. We have seen a gradually increasing number of sales taking place overall. How long is it taking to sell? So 42 days in April versus 40 a year ago and 52 2 years ago. Look, overall, 42 days is still longer than average for April, which is 36 days. It's not the lengths that we have seen at some points in the recent past. It's still more than what is typical though. So duration to sell is still a little on the long side. Inventory, we had 14 weeks worth of supply in April versus 13 a year ago, 17 2 years ago. Look, overall, we've seen it bouncing around that number of 15 over the last roughly year or so, up a bit, down a bit, and so on. And interestingly, 14 weeks versus 15, which is the long-term average. So on that basis, a little less inventory than what is normal over the long term. But over the last 12 months, what we've typically seen is about 10 weeks. So versus the last, I suppose, recent memory, 14 weeks worth of supply feels like a lot compared to what we've typically seen over the last 10 years of about 10 weeks worth of supply. So again, it feels like a much tougher market than has been typically the case over the last 10 years. How many listings we got on Trade Me? So 3,251 versus 3,014 a year ago, 2,550 2 years ago. So look, still more than a year ago, but only by a small amount. Still a lot more than 2 years ago. And again, if you look at the pattern of the graph there, you see the blue bar charts. The number of listings come on Trade Me has been reducing over the last couple of months. Folks, that's just typical for this time of year. As we head into winter, we tend to see fewer listings coming on and sales continue to take place, and so the amount of supply on the market reduces. Broadly speaking though, we are at greater supply levels than we've seen in any April or any May, I suppose this is May numbers of course, than we've seen for about 10 years. So we've still got a lot of supply on the market. Just the degree to which it's more than last year is slipping away. So in summary, folks, Wellington values are down versus a year ago, and especially they've been pretty soft in Wellington City, unfortunately. New listings, fewer than 12 months ago, which is really positive news. That's a first kind of glimmering light, if you like, for those of you who are selling out there. A decrease in the amount of new listings coming to the market at this time of the year compared to a year ago, so that's positive news. Sales volumes continue to rise gradually, slowly, but consistently. Again, a positive story for sellers. Duration to sell is up slightly and still slightly longer than what is typical for this time of year. Inventory levels are about normal for long-term levels, but still up on what we've typically seen in the last 10 years or so. Trade Me listings are up on a year ago, but down seasonally as we head into winter. So overall message for sellers, as I say, values are still soft, have been soft again in April. There's just more supply out there. Too much supply out there for the market to be tight and for conditions to be firming. Message for buyers, there's still a huge amount to choose from, so make the most of these conditions while they're still around. Big thanks, of course, to Real Estate Institute and to realestate.co.nz, where I get all of this source data from. Big thanks to you for checking in, and of course, if you want individualised advice, you know where to reach me. It's Adam at Low & Co. Thanks for checking in. See you next time.